The Badlands, running the Badlands. Explain those Badlands. That's a hell of a name.
All right. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Why We Vote. This is a kind of a special edition, as Ash and I both right now are in Plymouth, Massachusetts at GART 8. So we are pre-recording this almost a full week before the show. How you doing, Ash?
And I'm great. That's difficult, right? Because the election news is moving so fast that it's hard to know what we would cover that would still be relevant and, up to date for the show. But thankfully, we have something timeless. And that is the other half of David Becker's town hall meeting with election officials around the country, where he's about to take questions. So we're very excited to bring you the second half of David Becker's. In fact, we'll put, I'll try to remember to put the link to the first half in the comments of the show.
Yeah, and we also covered 2 weeks ago on Why We Vote. We covered it as well. So like Ash said, this is timeless. So who knows what's going to happen by Friday in terms of election news. It's moving so fast right now. But the next Why We Vote, we are actually going to be joined by one of the original investigators into Act Blue smurfing, and that is from OMG, O'Keefe Media Group, and I'm looking forward to that. So be sure to tune in next week. But hopefully we don't have to make any special edits or anything like that while we're away at GART, because something so epic happens that we have to cover it. I don't know. Could happen.
Imagine we'll do breaking news at GART. And everybody should get their GART virtual tickets if you haven't already. All of the panels are available on demand, so anything that you might have missed is still available for you to catch. And there's still 2 more days of GART content to come, plus behind the scenes access to the Telegram chat and engaging with the content. I'm certain, even though this is happening a week before, I'm certain we're having a good time.
Yes, most likely. Ash, last week, 3 days ago from today, or 2 days ago, but last episode.
Sorry, hang on a second, Brian. Badlandsmedia.tv/events.
Yes.
I didn't mention that part.
Yeah, sorry. On the last show, I was thinking about this, and this is just kind of off cuff, kind of whatever. We were talking about the lawsuit that against the executive order dealing with election integrity that President Trump put out, and the pushback against requiring the EAC to alter their federal form, and the judge saying that President Trump doesn't have that authority, yada, yada, yada. And I was thinking about this, and I think it would be, and we're recording this on Sunday, so maybe something happens in the next week, because right now is a perfect time for President Trump to do this. I think President Trump needs to come out and publish an executive order ordering the IRS to do away with tax on tips. And I think it's going to be epic to watch people push back on that. Because when we're reading through the judge's ruling on the EAC, it's saying the EAC does have the authority to make some regulations and rules and whatnot, but the president can't order them to do that. And so now if President Trump comes out and says, hey, IRS, I'm ordering you guys not to tax tips, and the IRS would have that authority to do that. It's going to be interesting to have to watch these leftist NGOs sue President Trump, saying he does not have that authority, or allowing it to go and saying that he does have that authority. Now, the reason I bring this up is because the rules and regulations, the EAC being able to make rules and regulations and the president having no ability to influence that is absolutely absurd. The idea that these bureaucratic institutions are independent, like the EAC, they say it's an independent institution. No, it's not. You cannot have that. There are 3 branches of government. There's the judiciary, there's the legislative, and then there's the executive branch, period. Those are the 3 branches of our government. Everything that takes place in our government happens under one of those 3 branches. Congress writes the law, Congress creates the bureaucratic institution, and the president is tasked with executing that. Now, if Congress turns around and says, hey, you have this authority, EAC, we are giving you the authority to promulgate rules and develop rules and promulgate those rules, the president is the one that oversees that authority. And he absolutely has the ability. That would be like a CEO, a CEO of a company saying, hey, I want to make this rule for our company. And then, media, PR saying, no, you don't have that authority. And so I think there's going to be an actual battle over this. And I want to see Trump kind of double down on that by going after the IRS and making them fight against something that should be wildly popular with the Democratic base as well as the conservative base. No tax on tips, that is. So I was just throwing that out there. I thought of this the other night while I was smoking a joint, and I was like, this is some good stuff right here.
Yeah, I just point of clarification, the EAC's rulemaking authority only extends to the federal form, the federal registration form. And we're going to see that clarify, as we talked about on last week's show, that's in the order. So I wonder, I don't remember if that comes up in these questions of the authorities of the EAC, but we'll see. I remember he talked about it in the first part. Yeah. The interesting, just wanted to mention, so it's Sunday that we're recording this, and at 3:45 a.m. Mountain Time here, there was a massive immigration raid, and they rolled up 100 illegals at a nightclub, illegal nightclub. And there's a whole bunch of headlines coming out about this today. But one thing that I noticed in the videos, it's a full, state, local, federal, collective, interagency task force kind of situation, and the IRS criminal investigations are out there making migrant arrests, which I thought was kind of funny. The U.S. Postal Inspector as well was out there making arrests.
It's wild, man. It's wild times watching the left melt down over this judge that just got arrested for the immigrant, that she helped evade arrest out the back door, and saying he's arresting judges. The same people that were saying no one is above the law.
No one is above the law.
While they were arresting him over a signature on a business form and bending the rules, like openly trying novel legal theories to go after him. And now those same derps are sitting there melting down over a judge getting arrested for aiding and abetting an illegal immigrant with an arrest warrant and scampering them out. So
and straight up helping them evade arrest, like that's right. And that is there was an episode of the 10th Amendment Center podcast that dealt with this and was explicitly talking about how states don't have to cooperate. The states don't have to cooperate with ICE, but they can't obstruct, and that's what she did. I'm sure we're going to hear a lot about that this week. But the New Mexico judge was crazy as well. That guy, so the judge had the migrant in their guest house, and some reports say there were 3 migrants, but the one in question, the TDA member, had decapitated victims on his phone, 2 of them. The judge destroyed the phone and walked it to a dumpster in a city area to get rid of it. Like, and there's leftists out there going, we're arresting judges now. I'm sorry. Is that conduct okay? Or are they above the law? Are judges that are harboring migrants with evidence of decapitation on their phones and helping destroy that evidence, are they above the law?
Yep. Just like Evers in Wisconsin, issuing guidance to all of his employees, his, state employees, saying that if ICE shows up with a warrant to detain anybody or whatever, don't comply. Yeah. Good luck with that. Good luck. We're not talking about they show up, uninvited, and, that you want to go in, you say, no, you're not welcome here, get a warrant. They have a warrant, in this case. And it's shaping up to get really spicy. I'll tell you what, our 10th Amendment panel at GART is going to be pretty epic. So
yeah, there's so many directions it can go. There's a lot to discuss. But I mean, us talking about these judges, this is old news now because it's Friday. So we have to exist in the future, Brian, and stop talking about current events that aren't going to be current anymore. I know. The pace has changed. This will feel like a month ago. These judge arrests will feel like a month ago.
Let's get into the timelessness of David Becker. But before we do that, we got to jump into our sponsors. And Ash, take it away with our friends over at Safe Street.
Now is the perfect time to secure your home and your loved ones. Get a free ADT smart home security system valued at $1,200 from ADT authorized provider Safe Streets. Plus, get a Google Nest doorbell camera at no cost and a $200 Visa gift card from Safe Streets, the most trusted name in home security with more than 106,000 4.9 star Trustpilot reviews. Visit getsafestreets.com/badlands or call 925-529-6541. That's 925-529-6541 to speak to a representative today. $99 customer installation charge and purchase of monitoring service required for their termination fee to apply.
All right. And then let's jump over to our friends over at River Bitcoin. River announces Bitcoin interest on cash. Now, US dollars in your River account will earn a high yield interest rate that can be paid in Bitcoin. With the price of groceries, mortgage, and tuition on a steep rise, people are now looking at a retirement age of 80 instead of 60. And it's all because dollars are losing value at a record pace. The challenge is finding a way to hold on to your dollars while still getting ahead. That's where River Bitcoin comes in. River Bitcoin's interest on cash protects your dollars with FDIC insurance while offering you the option to reap the potential gains of Bitcoin. Over the past 2 years, you would have earned double the rate of most high-yield savings account and 16 times the rate of the national average savings account with Bitcoin interest on cash. Get started at badlandsmedia.tv/river. Move your cash over to River today and start earning a real interest rate with Bitcoin. Again, that's badlandsmedia.tv/river. All right. And let's bring on the scoundrel himself, the most pathetic man in all of elections, Mr. David Becker.
I'm so excited. So where we last left off with David Becker, he had just told everybody that the election integrity order didn't have any teeth, that the president was exceeding his authorities and that we could all expect lawsuits. And then he opened it up for questions. Again, you can see the first half of this on the Why We Vote from 2 weeks ago. And I will, as I said, try to remember to put the link to that episode in the comments of this episode. But here we go.
Hold on. Do you real quick want to just give people a quick overview of who David Becker is?
David Becker is the director of the Center for Election Innovation and Research. He's also the co-founder of the ERIC system, Electronic Registration Information Center, which sends potential eligible but unregistered voters to states, and the states take them in. Now, part of that agreement is that they won't send citizenship information, and they do send non-citizens. So they're an entity that basically exists to pad the voter rolls with ineligible voters. And as we saw here in Colorado, because of a data coding mismatch between the DMV database in Colorado and the ERIC system, the batch of ERIC system EBUs that they received, 30,000 ineligible voters, non-voters, people received postcards from the Secretary of State's office encouraging them to register to vote. And they're like, oh, whoops, it was a data coding mismatch because they send us non-citizens all the time.
All right, let's get into it.
All right, here we go.
That I'm seeing in the Q&A. Please put your Q&A questions in there. And by the way, those of you who put questions in your RSVP, I tried to answer some of them in my statements. I hope that worked out for you. They were great questions. Thanks to all of you for that. I have a question here, whether the president can alter by decree the VVSG standards. The answer is no, in my opinion. I think the president does not have the authority to do that. The EAC is the sole authority for that. I think we should remember the first V, as I often say.
So that's interesting because this court ruling that came out says that the only authority that the EAC has is the rulemaking, is the federal form, the only rulemaking authority that they have. But he's talking about the voluntary voting system guidelines, which it really doesn't matter because they don't follow them anyway. But the EAC is the only one with the authority to determine the VVSG. Sounds like what he just said.
Well, and it's also kind of a dumb question because Trump doesn't alter it in that executive order. He just demands that it be followed. Otherwise, you're going to lose funding. He's not altering it. And again, here we are again with this, like the EAC is independent. The EAC is not independent. If Congress gives them the authority to do something, the president is the executor of that agency. There is no such thing as Congress cannot create extra branches of government. And if they're independent of both the executive, the legislative, and the judiciary, that's essentially what Congress is doing, is creating a fourth branch of government. And that's the bureaucracy. And this is the problem that we've come across in this country, is that these bureaucracies run, rampant. They can do whatever the hell they want. And, the Supreme Court with Chevron kind of started to reel back in that power, but we haven't actually seen any substantive, clawing back of that power. And here it's like the judge here is doubling down and saying the EAC is independent. The hell they are.
Well, I think we have seen a little bit of it, because it comes down to the authorities that they think they have under the Administrative Procedures Act. We haven't seen it as it pertains to elections, but the immigration stuff that's going on, a whole bunch of claims that were brought under the APA were just basically waved off and said, no, you can't do that. You can only bring habeas. This was the Alien Enemies Act one. So we are seeing the downstream impacts of Chevron. It's slower than we'd like, and not as comprehensive as we'd like, I think.
And all aren't in this space. The first.
I was just going to say, any clawback that we're going to get is something that has to be challenged legally. Like, they're not going to go through. Nobody's going to go through and be like, okay, this was illegitimate. This is illegitimate. And so we're talking about thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of regulation and rules that have been, thrust upon us. And I mean, we're going to have to go one by one, line item to take these back. It's absurd.
Well, if you have, if the industries abandon the public-private partnership nonsense and start to challenge some of these regulations, then you could have a more comprehensive impact. But people need to find their courage. All right, let's go.
V and VVSG stands for voluntary. But as you all know, some of your states have adopted all or part of the VVSG standards as state law. So you may have a requirement of state law that I believe it's about a dozen states that adopt the entirety of the VVSG, and then many other states that adopt many parts of it. And it's interesting as well that he specified VVSG 2.0, which I think no systems are currently certified to. If it gets amended, certification of those systems is not going to happen immediately,
as we've been saying.
And it's so it's really questionable what could happen and what level of chaos could occur. I'll also say, for those of you that have particularly ballot marking devices that use barcodes, and as I said, these are just the states I know of off the top of my head: Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Los Angeles County, California. There has been the allegation, often interestingly from more left-leaning groups, that these barcodes are hackable and create a vulnerability. I will share my opinion, informed from 30 years of work, which is that machine counting is more accurate, more cost-effective than hand counting of ballots, and that when we rely upon machine counting, we're relying upon software to interpret marks on a ballot, regardless of how that's done. Which means that OCR, optical character recognition, is not necessarily inherently more secure than reading a barcode or reading a timing marks off of a hand mark ballot. So I think as long as there is a human readable element of the ballot, which ballot marking devices do create a ballot summary card that does that, and that human readable element is what's audited, I think that's as secure as optical character recognition or hand marking of ballots, and that's largely been misrepresented by some activist groups.
Okay. So he just said, we have to use machines because it's super duper efficient and more accurate, and it's going to be, chaos if we do hand mark paper ballots that are hand counted. Also, it's not more secure. And we're relying on code. We're relying on the code to read what's happening in the machine. I mean, haven't they been basically fighting against that argument? Now it's just accepted.
Well, I mean, he's taking shots at Marilyn Marks and coalition there when he says, mostly leftist NGOs. The whole point that he's taught first, like you said, it is not more cost effective. It is not more accurate. We don't know whether or not it's more accurate. He brings up optical character recognition, OCR. Well, we just talked with Phil Davis for like 5 weeks about OCR audits in Georgia, where a lot of screwy crap happened. I still don't think Phil fully grasps what happened with that, but the OCR optical character recognition audit that they did there was anything but on the up and up. It was very, very deceptive. And the way that the batches were uploaded, the way that the numbers were put out, it's very, I don't know, man. Didn't he say earlier in this, and I'm having a hard time remembering, but didn't he say earlier that Trump's executive order with the VVSG and all that stuff, with the power of the purse, if these machines aren't certified or lose certification, this can cost tens of billions of dollars? Yeah. And now he's saying that the machines are cheaper. I mean, they cost millions upon millions, tens of millions of dollars every year to update them, to upgrade them, to put new, antivirus, to program with that, with
patching and trusted builds and upkeep. And actually the managed service contracts is where they make their money. What we saw in Mesa County with when Tina Peters took the images, they decertified the machines, Jenna did, and they had to get new machines. And the vendor came in and was like, well, we'll give you the machines and you'll sign up for 10 years of maintenance contracts. And that's where the exchange of funds came in that example. I can understand what he's saying about the cost of mass decertifying all of the machines all over the country. What are you going to do? That's going to be a significant cost if it's done in that way. But it, begs, why aren't we doing hand counting at the precincts level, where the average precinct is 2,000 people, and the legislatures can vote to make them smaller so that we can have verifiably accurate elections. But we don't want verifiably accurate elections. We want centralized technology code-based elections, not because it's more cost efficient, but because it's more profitable for David Becker and his friends.
Correct. And the last thing I'll add is that, in addition to the maintenance, like you had said there, all of these jurisdictions that are running these voting machines, almost all of them have employees of the voting machine company that are in each jurisdiction doing, technical work, overseeing and all that. And they charge exorbitant amounts of money. We got the contracts from the logic and accuracy test in Georgia, in Fulton County, and they were charging $2,000 per hour. And, $2,000 per day per employee. And they were charging $5,000 on election day per employee, to the tune of $2 million. So
very profitable.
Yeah, it's a very lucrative business. And on top of that, you're also winning over, elections, however you want to go. So
keep it all going. Yep.
So I think this even if the president did have the power to do this, which he doesn't, or even if the EAC wanted to move in this direction, which I don't think it's inclined to, I don't think this is a very good use of our resources and time and money to basically require something on voting systems that doesn't bring any level of security and could in fact hamper jurisdictions' ability to provide the best voting systems for their voters. Hopefully that answered that question. I'm sorry, I'm just reading the questions that come through.
I wish I had. Screening.
There's a question about how VPATs are defined and what the executive order means when whether there's a voter verifiable paper record to check against fraud or mistake. I personally think VPAT probably does comply. To the degree the executive order is vague, welcome to my world. This is the executive order is vague in many places throughout. It indicates a pretty clear lack of an understanding about how elections are actually run. I really want to stress this. I would not spend a minute of lost sleep worrying about what happens if this executive order gets implemented. Is there a chance it gets implemented and upheld by the courts? yes, there's a chance. But I'm saying there's a chance for those of you that are Dumb and Dumber fans. Not much of a chance. I think it's very unlikely that that gets supported. So I would not worry about this much. By the way, accessible devices for those with disabilities are excluded from the EO, but we have moved so far along, and this is one of the troubles with the president's disinformation that he spread about, particularly about the 2020 election. We have more paper ballots, more verifiability of those paper ballots, more audits of those paper ballots than ever before. You know this. You have just been through, those of you that have run elections since at least 2020, you have been through the 2 highest turnout elections in American history and one of the highest turnout midterm elections in American history. And one of those elections, 2020, was run in the middle of a global pandemic with the highest turnout ever. And those elections have withstood more scrutiny than any elections in American history. Legal scrutiny, media scrutiny, every kind of scrutiny you can imagine. And your work has stood the test every time. And that's because of this work to create more security and transparency and verifiability. The lack of understanding about how secure and verifiable our voting processes right now is deeply disturbing. And I think the vagueness in the EO reflects that.
These people don't even know, like he's clearly speaking to election officials here.
Bureaucratic and elected, right?
Right.
So the people into elected positions like clerks and local people, plus the underlying bureaucratic officials, the NAS members and whatnot. Yeah.
And he has a massive conflict of interest in telling these people, with any sort of veracity, that everything they did was perfectly fine. Now, I'm not saying that the election officials that he's speaking to necessarily did anything wrong. Like, they didn't do it wrong deviously, right? They weren't trying to be devious in how this was run. But what they did was not on the up and up. I mean, you look at Georgia, you look at these states where, open records requests are being denied. Chain of custody is broken and invalid. These are problems that when somebody like Becker is sitting there telling you everything you guys did was great, you guys just had the biggest election ever and you came out with flying colors. The hell you did. Now, I'm not saying it's their fault, but when people like David Becker, who, somehow command authority in the election space, field because of, like I said, conflict of interest, because he handles most of the voter registration in almost half the states. He was tasked with dispersing almost $70 million for election, to support elections across the country, disproportionately to swing states, of course. But when he goes out there and gaslights to these election officials, he's just kind of bolstering the position that this was the safest and most secure election ever. And I don't understand how anybody can actually look with nonpartisan eyes, like take off the blinders, take off the blinders and look at this election. And it was not, it just simply wasn't.
Yeah, and when I said NAS before, I meant NASED, the Association of State Elected Directors that aren't elected officials, right? There's a whole group of elections officials that aren't elected officials. I think he appears panicked. He seems that I think it is incredibly irresponsible to tell them not to lose sleep that President Trump's executive order might get implemented. That seems like his own hopium and copium that he's dealing with. And you can't ignore. So the highest turnout in history happened during a global pandemic. Well, first and foremost, that's a facially invalid statement because we're talking about, didn't millions of people die in the pandemic? Adults. So like voters, they died, right? And yet there were 81 million votes for Joe Biden in that election. And then, millions of them dissipated and disappeared in the 2024 election. Don't lose sight of the fact that this guy is the co-founder of ERIC. The overwhelming turnout in my opinion, I hypothesize, in my opinion, the overwhelming turnout in 2020 was using ineligible voter identities on, and there was, you know, a significant amount of fraud in 2020. If that's true, and it's my opinion, but if it's true, David Becker and the systems that he has brought into our lives, as well as this, you know, change management communications approach to handle all of the elections officials around the country, he should be in some trouble.
Yes.
And there's a documented record of all of that, of the records of the 2020 election, I believe, have been preserved. And I think we will see justice for it.
We'll find out. He's trying to just bolster his position here and kind of reaffirm these people that they did incorrectly reaffirm that the 2020 election was safe and secure, and it's all because of them and how great they did. And they may very well have done very good jobs. The fraud goes well beyond your average poll manager or poll watcher, or even, you know, some of the election directors that think that everything they did was on the up and up, because you're voting on black box and because registrations are handled by a partisan organization. And I say partisan, even though they claim to be nonpartisan, because David Becker has been called a partisan in his former role in the DOJ. Highly partisan.
Rabid partisan.
Partisan. And that was one of them. One of the people I believe that called him that, I believe, was a Democrat.
I'm not quoting anyone. I'm calling him a rabid partisan.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know if somebody called him that, but I'm certainly calling him that.
They did. I can pull up the quote, but go ahead.
All right, here we go.
I've got a question about does the EO purport to change state laws? Well, to some degree it does. It basically says if states don't, for instance, change their receipt deadline for mail ballots if it's after the election, that it can't actually change state laws. It's an attempt to bully state laws. I mean, the federal government can't go rewrite state legislation or state constitutions. What it can do is use the power of the purse, the federal government can, through Congress and Congress only, to encourage certain actions. Probably a good innocuous example of that is many of you know, as recently as the 80s, it was legal to drink alcohol under 21. In some places, I grew up in Colorado, they had you could buy beer at 18, which was great when we were in high school. And if states wanted to receive highway funding, though, they had to increase their drinking age to 21, and they basically created a pot of highway funding that would go to states if they did that, and the states all did that to receive that carrot of highway funding. That's legal. That's constitutional. I don't think the way funding is distributed in the elections context is, unless Congress passes a specific law, which it could, but right now under current law, Congress has not authorized a differential approach to the disbursement of funds based upon whether or not the president approves of how you run elections. And
okay, that's false. And we went through it in the court order on last week's show, that the state funding is not unconditional, and they have to comply with the NVRA and other laws. And so yeah, there is conditional, and I think even discretionary based on that court order on the funding. Anything to add to that?
No, but I did find the quote real quick. Brad Schultzman in 2005 at the DOJ, Department of Justice Civil Rights Division, referring to a lawsuit where he contacted the city of Boston to offer help to defeat a lawsuit open against them by the DOJ. Conflict. I mean, imagine that, an attorney reaching out to a defendant and saying, "Hey, I work for the plaintiff in this case, and I'll help you out." That's insane. Brad Schultzman, the acting Department Civil Rights Division head, said, quote, "It was the most unethical thing I've ever seen," and called Becker a quote unquote hardcore leftist who, quote, couldn't stand conservatives. And then, of course, Hans von Spakovsky, who's a conservative himself, quote unquote conservative, said, quote, "In his role in the DOJ, he was supposed to be nonpartisan, but his emails uncovered in the Boston investigation revealed nasty, disparaging remarks about Republicans, very unethical and very unprofessional." And that's in his official capacity as a DOJ civil rights attorney. So yes, he is an avowed hardcore leftist, and anything
rabid partisan,
and anything he touches is no question a partisan, massive conflict for partisanship. Go ahead.
I think that's appropriate. All right. Next,
timing
next
of that was
question.
perfect.
Does the executive
That
order
was
increase the
perfect.
chance of passage of the SAVE Act? In my opinion, no. I think it's near zero. It was near zero on Monday. I think it's near zero now that it would go through the Senate. I think what we are seeing, and probably many of you are seeing, is that we are seeing certain states that are more aligned with the president try to align their state policies consistent with the executive order. Now, that is their right, whether it's a good decision or not, whether it's good policy. I generally think it isn't, but states can do that. Right now, there's a bill pending in Georgia that was actually somewhat changed at the last minute to try to comport with elements of the executive order. I know there are other states and other legislators that are probably thinking along those lines. I mentioned Mississippi allows ballot or had allowed ballots to come in after Election Day until the Fifth Circuit ruled that couldn't be done. Well, Mississippi at any time without a court ruling that way could simply change its laws and decide they're not going to accept it anymore. That's legal. Again, putting aside whether it's good policy or not, because I think there are good reasons to either require them to be on Election Day or to allow for them to come in a few days later. I think that's up to the states. But a state legislature absolutely has that authority to do that. And I think we might see some states trying to embrace some elements of the EO, which would be, of course, barring some kind of bizarre constitutional violation, would be otherwise legal.
So just pause it.
Okay, I've got a question. What the executive order's language about?
Real quick, we talked last week about the challenge to the EAC being able to demand citizenship, and I think that'll go all the way up to the Supreme Court, because I do think that the EAC, I think there is an obligation that citizenship has to be proven beyond just an attestation under penalty of perjury that you're a citizen. I think that's absurd. I mean, imagine going to buy liquor and saying I'm 21 and signing penalty of perjury to buy liquor. You can't do that. So you're telling me that you can't buy liquor, you can't go into a strip club, you can't buy a lottery ticket, you can't do any of this stuff unless you actually prove that you're of the legal age, but you can vote without proving your citizenship. That's absurd. But again, that was not the big part of this executive order. The big part to me was the VVSG, complying with the VVSG, and cleaning up the databases. Because if you clean up the databases, the citizenship question, it doesn't become moot, but it handles a lot of that from the past. And then you have at least a fresh slate to start all over again. And the VVSG, like David Becker said, none of them comply with the VVSG 2.0. And so all that funding would dry up and it would have to go away. And so I think that's what he's terrified of. Even if he did this after the lawsuit, I still think he'd be terrified about this executive order.
I'm here for it.
About not allowing votes via barcode prevent the use of systems to show both a barcode and a human readable version. I think absolutely it would purport to do that. In fact, again, there might be systems, I don't claim to know every system perfectly, but the systems I'm familiar with in many of the jurisdictions, the ballot summary card, that is the result of voting on a ballot marking device and is the ballot of record, contains both a human readable element and a barcode. It's often the case, if not always the case, that the barcode is what's initially unofficially counted in the tabulator, but during audits and usually during recounts, it should be this, certainly hand recounts, it is the human readable element that governs. It is the official ballot. And I will guarantee.
Did he just say that the barcode is the unofficial result?
Yeah, it says read first. But in recounts and audits, the human readable element is what matters, which is kind of hilarious because it's an act of God to get a recount or an audit.
First of all, they just passed that law in House Bill 974 in Georgia. So that was not the case prior to. When they in Georgia, they did do the hand recount. And what did they find in the hand recount? Between the two machine counts, they found massive discrepancies. I mean, to the tunes of like 6,000 or 7,000 votes between there, 6,300 votes or whatever that they were off by. And that was only a portion of the ballots that they did a hand count on. Georgia just passed the law, I believe, that when they do the recounts, they have to use the human readable text and not the barcode. Up until then, their machine counts are just scanned through again. And the official result is the machine count, which is the barcode.
I'm backing it up just a little bit so we can hear it again.
With a human readable element and a barcode. It's often the case, if not always the case, that the barcode is what's initially unofficially counted in the tabulator. But during audits and usually during recounts, it should be this, certainly hand recounts, it is the human readable element that governs. It is the official ballot. And I will guarantee you that if any of these cases went to court on a recount in a narrow race where there were a lot of these ballots, a court's going to rely upon the human readable element. So I believe this EO, I don't think there is I might be wrong. Many of you, please let me know if your jurisdiction uses a system where the voter only sees a barcode and doesn't have any human readable element on the ballot of record. I think this EO is clearly directed at ballot marking devices in places like Georgia, which produce a very clear human readable ballot that has a barcode on it. And I should say, those ballots were crucial to Georgia running elections as securely as they did. Their ability to hand count over 5 million presidential ballots in 2020 in the middle of COVID in only 5 days, when election officials in Georgia hadn't seen a paper ballot in 2 decades. That was based on the ability that the ballot summary cards that the BMDs produced were so clear and devoid of vagueness with regard to voter intent, for instance.
There's no vagueness in a QR code.
This guy is another level of retardation. Sorry.
It was critical, Brian, for them to be able to count all the COVID votes. For them to be able to count all the COVID votes in Georgia, they had to use BMDs with the barcodes.
I mean, he
sounds like an admission almost.
I still can't get back to him saying that the barcode is the unofficial count. And it's the audits
but
and
but the implication of what he says there is that the barcode is what is read unless there's an audit or a recount. The barcode is what is read.
So how can it be unofficial? Because how can it be the unofficial count if the very next thing you say is unless there is an audit or a recount? Meaning that it's not always going to happen. Plus, the audits they do are risk-limiting audits. And so they're only counting a small percentage of the vote until they prove beyond mathematical possibility. I think risk-limiting audits are a joke. I don't think
they are a joke.
But
also, that's the number that goes to the press. And as we know from Arizona in 2020, and the press calls elections.
Press is the ones that are the arbiters of election information, election results. Yep.
All right.
Is there any chance of HAVA funding being increased? I wouldn't count on it. I mean, this is something we've seen in both Democratic and Republican administrations, and at the state level with Democratic and Republican legislatures, where they impose burdens on you. They make more demands of you and your staff, while either keeping funding at the same level or even decreasing it, and also sometimes restricting your ability to seek philanthropic funding and other things to help augment what would otherwise be a deficit in public funding from your legislatures. This is one of the things I've worked against my entire life, unfunded mandates, whether it's at state or federal level. I do not think it's likely that there is going to be significant federal funding provided in the foreseeable future, and I wish I could say otherwise. There have been efforts to try to get what we really think is necessary, which is billions of additional dollars to you all to deal with the much more complex and heightened cybersecurity threat, the larger turnouts, the disinformation that's swirling.
I thought it was cheaper.
That makes your lives more difficult.
The cybersecurity threat goes away if we don't use
cybersecurity, if we don't use cyber machines. Oh, but
we need billions and billions of more dollars.
We need billions of dollars for the cybersecurity threat. Guess what, Ash? What does cybersecurity constantly have to do?
Update,
evolve, grow.
Yeah, you have to stay ahead of the threat landscape, and the bad guys evolve way faster than the good guys. So you're almost always playing catch up. It's almost like it's not the best way to run our elections.
Well, it's certainly not the most cost-effective way.
It's definitely not.
Well, unfortunately, I don't think that's likely to happen.
We want more money.
So I've got a question about whether there's an EO that declared English as the official language of the United States, and whether that alters the multilingual election requirements of the Voting Rights Act, Section 203. And the answer is no, it can't do that. The president might think he can do that, but he can't. Again, Section 203 of the Voting Rights Act, which requires that jurisdictions that meet certain thresholds of voters who don't speak English well and within that jurisdiction receive materials and perhaps assistance in their in the languages that are determined to be numerous enough. I enforced that quite a bit when I was with the DOJ. I will tell you that in my experience, the jurisdictions did a much better job of that when they weren't sued, when they developed processes on their own, working with their minority language communities in their jurisdictions. And I was very proud that there were many places that I worked with there wasn't a lawsuit. We just facilitated a better conversation, and those processes are now models in places like Los Angeles County, which has more languages covered under Section 203 than any other county by a large margin. So I don't think it changes that at all. I think there will continue to be, unless Congress changes it, and Congress has the ability to change this. I don't want anything that I'm saying to suggest that just because the president can't, with a wave of a pen, decree what a king might decree. Congress does have the authority to do that and has exercised that authority under both Republicans and Democrats, and often in a bipartisan way. And I would encourage Congress that if it considers using that authority, that it listen to the people who best know how to exercise that authority. And that is you all, the election officials at the state and local level. And we also know that sometimes that doesn't happen as much as it should. And I will tell you, if more pieces of federal legislation get introduced, feel free to reach out to me. I want your input on this. We want to educate members of Congress of both parties with what you're saying. Okay, let's go.
Any thoughts on that?
I just wish that these national associations of secretaries of state and state election directors, I just wish that there was an alternative viewpoint that they were able to be exposed to. And it's unfortunate that the only people they ever peddle out in front of them are absolute retards like David Becker.
Oh, he's not a retard. He's a very sinister change champion. They shut down this is something that we saw with Tina Peters, right? And it's not at the national level, but at the state level, the County Clerks Association, Colorado County Clerks Association, CCCA, is run by Matt Crane. Matt Crane is a political animal, as well as, invested in the success of voter companies, voting vendors, Global Mobile and Dominion Voting Systems specifically. One he was the poster child for, the other one his wife worked for and is ostensibly vested in the company. When Jenna Griswold announced that she'd stolen passwords and stuff, and they went and raided her office, Matt Crane was trying to handle her. He called her multiple times. Hey, we can figure this out. Bring us back in. And when he realized that she wasn't buying what he was selling, he turned. And there's recordings of that change in his demeanor. These guys are handlers. The associations they operate outside the law. They have no oversight. They're comprised of government officials in a limited capacity, but mainly people like David Becker, right? Election innovation people, election sharing people. Oh, we're just going to make sure everybody's on the same page. And also our incentive structure is tied to the centralized system continuing. They're handling them. And that's what he's doing in this video. He's trying to handle as many, there's thousands of elections officials around the country. He's trying to handle as many of them as he can in a video like this. And then I bet there's some one-on-one conversations and other things happening with the ones who are a bit more resistant.
Well, and that goes to the point. And by the way, you mentioned, Crane and Global Mobile and Dominion. And I know there's, in Colorado especially, I think there's a Runbeck associate that's involved.
Wade Williams, senior advisor to Runbeck. He's he at the same time was the city councilman at large in Colorado Springs, which is an elected position. His wife was a county commissioner who in her role had oversight of Runbeck funding.
Right. So what I'm getting at here is, again, going back to what I said, I wish they would offer an alternative viewpoint, because the viewpoints that they're all getting are disgustingly skewed. David Becker has a very specific interest in continuing the status quo in our elections the way they are right now. The people you just mentioned right there, not just in Colorado, but across the country, have a very specific interest in continuing the status quo, as you said. And so they stand in front of these associations, which are not government, government bodies, but bodies of government officials. Okay, right? The National Association of Secretary of State and State Elections Directors, bodies, bureaucratic or NGO bodies made up of government officials that are catered to by these individuals that go to them and have these elaborate and elegant events that they put on, like the National Secretary of State Conference that you guys may or may not have gone to.
I was not there, but we broke news out of that event. Yeah.
Right. There were people that were there, and it's a very nice event. It's at a nice hotel. They wine and dine you.
Catered. There's happy hours, and yeah.
Yeah,
perk.
and it's a party for these people. And so they
Yeah.
go there and they get lied to by people that have a vested
They
interest.
get handled.
Yeah, exactly. And it's disgusting. Like it's not just the fraud and every other, aspect of this, but these people are literally being manipulated by people that have a financial interest in making sure that everything continues the way it is right now. And it's disgusting.
And this is the public-private partnership model, and you see this across industries. It's perhaps most egregious in the elections sector, but there's
Pharmaceuticals.
Yeah, I was just going to
Pharmaceuticals
say,
are way worse.
Same model though, right? It's the same model of the professional associations and the NGOs operating as this, extra governmental glue that ties together the status quo, as you're saying. 100%.
Pharmaceuticals, big pharma is worse because not only are they wined and dined on a higher scale, I mean, we're talking like cruises and all that stuff, but the doctors that are being wined and dined are either arrogant and think that they, I'm very well educated. I've been in college for 12 years and I've been practicing. So I know everything this guy is saying is actually true. Exactly. Yeah. And so they, or they're complicit and they're just like, yeah, I know this is really dangerous, but I'm getting a lot of money for prescribing it. So I'm going to continue to do so, which is a violation of the Hippocratic Oath. But anyways,
go to the next one. I got a question about whether some offices are doing contingency plannings if the SAVE Act is passed, which again, I think is very unlikely, or services provided by MSISAC go away, which could happen. Certainly, I think whether they go away entirely or whether they're somewhat less useful, I think that's really possible. And the question, it's a good one. How can election officials be more proactive in kind of planning for these things? I think there is an aspect, and I think you've all felt it over the last 5 years or so, to overwhelm you all, to troll you constantly, to suck up your bandwidth, public records requests, disinformation, doxing, all of these other things. And I'm going to mention at the end the Election Official Legal Defense Network, EOLDN.org, which is available to any election official who needs legal advice for free.
Except Tina Peters. Tina Peters.
How dare your constituents bring you truth that disputes what we've been telling you about the election systems?
Yeah,
open records requests, disinformation. Like, we're not allowed to do open records requests. It's no wonder they're shutting down open records request systems. You and I covered when it happened and bring it up all the time. Yehuda Miller and what he uncovered in terms of at the time that people like David Becker were telling all of the elections officials, safest and most secure election in history. More than 70% of elections devices were vulnerable to spear phishing attack. They knew that. They covered it up. They put it under a traffic limiting protocol because they didn't want it disrupting the narrative.
I'm glad he brought up the EOLDN there because that was something that I was going to mention earlier, but I didn't. It wasn't really relevant at that moment. So the EOLDN is an organization that he started in 2020, following the 2020 election. I think it was actually in 2021, and it stands for the Election Official Legal Defense Network. And like he said right there, it's designed, it's set up to help go back. Like,
you don't want to wait until he's describing it at the end, because he's describing it at the end.
Oh, I didn't know he describes it. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's keep going then.
Yeah.
But I think the states that have done the best and the locals that have done the best are when the state associations of election officials have been strong and the locals have contributed to it. But this will sound silly, but don't forget self-care. Don't forget, your job is not to convince Jenna, the person most disconnected from reality, that the sky is blue and 1 + 1 = 2. I appreciate that so many of you are trying to do that. It's wonderful. But from my perspective, if you don't convince everyone that elections are secure and transparent, if you have legislators at the state or federal level who are pushing policies based on disinformation, that doesn't mean you failed. You are all focused on producing, in reality, the most accessible, secure, transparent, verifiable elections you could possibly produce. And you have succeeded on that count. Just keep preparing, banding together, particularly at the state level, speak with one voice.
I find his use of transparent very interesting.
Well, and he's also, I mean, these people are playing with the deck that the hand they're dealt. Mm-hmm. They're playing with the cards that they're dealt. And, they might be doing the right thing in terms of the administration of the election, but the voter rolls aren't clean. That's not necessarily, the county clerk's fault that the voter rolls aren't clean. If you're tasking a company like Eric to maintain your voter rolls, the voting machines aren't checked out. If the IP and the code, the source code for the machine is kept in escrow by the Secretary of State, the county clerks don't have that type of access to vet it themselves and ensure transparent. There is no transparency.
But like roll it back to the point. If you elections officials haven't convinced every person who's detached from reality that we have transparent elections, you haven't failed. You know how you can convince people that we have transparent elections? Be fucking transparent.
Yeah, exactly.
You would know we really are, though. We're really transparent. We're just, this is just misinformation. That's why we're failing, is because of misinformation. No, it's because you've actually obstructed every single time people try to get answers for very valid questions. You obstruct instead of being transparent. That's why.
And we still have not had access to the source code that the Secretary of State keeps in escrow. I think it was North Carolina is the closest we've gotten. I was listening to a podcast. I believe it was Doherty. Was Professor Doherty was doing the interview. It might have been with Professor Clements as well. But he had said during that interview that the Libertarian Party had sued in North Carolina because there's a law in North Carolina where if there's there's a law in North Carolina. I'll go back and listen to it, maybe clip it for next week or something. But there's a law in North Carolina that allows you to look at anything that the Secretary of State is tasked with keeping in escrow. And they sued to be able to look at it. And the only reason it stopped is because they ran out of money.
Yeah.
The only reason they stopped. And I did not know that was going on. I would have fundraised the hell out of that to continue that lawsuit to take a look at it. So, and then we still haven't gotten to the next part of the EOLDN.
It's at the end.
Okay, got
it. When you can talk to your legislators in Congress and at the state level. There are myths about elections and disinformation, and they're not only on one side of the aisle. And it's important to educate them. And if there's ever anything we can do, you have my contact information, our contact information. I'm at dbecker@electioninnovation.org. Reach out to me. We'll help in any way we can. We do not embrace policies that are designed to create a better election environment for either party. We embrace policies that are designed to make sure the will of the voters is heard and takes hold, and the winner of the plurality or majority of the vote takes office. So hopefully you'll all be able to keep doing that. There's a question about, this is Arizona specific, but it probably applies to a few of your states. There are special elections for Congress that are at various stages right now. There's a special election, for instance, for Representative Grijalva's seat, who just passed away his seat's in Southern Arizona. I believe the EO is effective as of the date it was signed. Again, I think the chance that it gets enjoined to the degree it would have any effect on any federal elections, even special elections happening soon, is I think it's likely to be enjoined. So I wouldn't worry about it too much. Arizona also already, as Arizona is the only state.
And just importantly, this is, he recorded this before the sections of the EO that require citizenship were in fact enjoined.
State that has a bifurcated voter registration system with federal only voters who haven't shown ID. It may be that, if the SAVE Act passes, or if the EO is upheld, that it might require those federal only voters to document citizenship in some way. But I'll also say that Arizona already, for the vast majority of voters, requires proof of citizenship because that's what their state voter registration list, state only, requires. I'm getting through these as fast as I can, and hopefully I'm getting to most of them. There's a really interesting portion. I'm going to paraphrase this question, asking about the section that requires DOJ to access voter files and apply those voter file data to federal records. It's very strange because the language of that section says publicly available voter files. As you know, in most places, there are sometimes some restrictions on publicly available voter files, but most states allow voter files to have them. The Trump campaign has voter files for every single voter in the United States. The RNC has voter files. So do the Democrats. You know this very well. The public voter files are widely accessible. Not sure why there need to be an executive order for that. You'll remember during the Voter Fraud Commission in Trump's first term, he tried to do something similar. And initially, he tried to get the private data, the sensitive PII, the unique identifiers like driver's license, social security numbers, dates of birth, many of which, if not all, are protected under your state laws from public disclosure, and I think rightly so. And he failed. And even Republican states pushed back on that hard. I mean, and then they shifted it to publicly available files, and it seemed like they just didn't want to do the work of going and getting the publicly available files like the vendors all do. I'm not sure what they want to do with this, but one thing I am sure is that I think it's likely that that's designed specifically to create a huge overstatement in the potential of non-citizen voters in the United States.
So that's foreshadowing. The DOJ review of voter files will show a huge overstatement of non-citizen voters in the voter files. He's like, well, it's not real. It's just going to look like an overstatement.
I don't know. I don't know what he's getting at with the voter file thing and the databases that DOJ was going to access, but I'm pretty sure that this is the section that he's talking about right here. The Commissioner of Social Security shall take all appropriate action to make available the Social Security number verification service, the Death Master file, and any other federal databases containing relevant information to all state and local election officials engaged in verifying the eligibility of individuals registering to vote or who are already registered. I mean, I don't know that the president and the Democratic Party and the Republican Party have access to the Social Security database.
But
and
he was specifically talking about DOJ.
But DOJ is the one that would go in and do that audit of the Social Security database.
Yeah.
So what I'm saying is he's trying to kind of like, I don't know if he's just, maybe it's somewhere else in here. I'm just doing a real quick glance of the executive order. I don't know what he's referring to when he says the voter file. Is he talking about the voter rolls? Is he talking about, but the executive order is very specific about what DOJ is supposed to go through, and it's the Social Security database because that's used to validate voter registrations.
Yeah.
And, we've seen a lot coming out on that. Millions upon millions upon millions upon millions of people that are on there that are not supposed to be on there. And, the excuse that it's old code and we don't have the funding to update it is not adequate. So go ahead.
Let's listen to him again, because I think he reveals the plot there.
Yeah, I think so too.
Hard. I mean, and then they shifted it to publicly available files, and it seemed like they just didn't want to do the work of going and getting the publicly available files like the vendors all do. I'm not sure what they want to do with this, but one thing I am sure
right here
is that I think it's likely that that's designed specifically to create a huge overstatement in the potential of non-citizen voters in the United States. If you take the public voter file, which just has names, maybe address, obviously, probably not birth date, and definitely not driver's license and social, and try to compare it to federal databases, you're going to get a huge percentage of false positives. There is a study.
Why
would you get a huge percentage of false positives if
he's getting ahead of the DOJ narrative. He's giving them the talking point.
So is he saying, okay, so he's saying that you would have the
Let's
voter
let him finish.
file. Okay.
He's about to explain it. Let's let him finish.
Stanford University about 10 years ago and looked at what happens when you have data from first name, last name, birth date, and try to match it to other data with first name, last name, birth date. And that's assuming you have birth date in both, which with the voter files you may not have. And with that, the error rate was 99.5%. I'm not making that up. So if there were 200 matches, one of them.
Cite your sources. There was a study and it showed that first name, last name, birth date is going to give you a 99.5% error rate across two data sets. I call bullshit.
If we have a 99.5% error rate in crossing name, first name, last name, date of birth,
and location,
and location,
yeah,
and we have a 99.5% error rate when matching that with the Social Security database, one of those two sources of data is grossly wrong.
Yeah. Which
And
is
that,
probably what we're going to find, which is why he's getting ahead of it by
dude.
saying, listen, here's what's going to happen is that they're going to compare these data sets. And you know what? You can't actually compare data sets because science said so. And so when they compare these data sets, it's going to have a whole bunch of ineligible voters in the rolls. It's like, okay, so you admit.
Well, even if it's 99.5% accurate, that's still 2 million people that are wrong, that are on there that should not be on there. 2 million people can influence an election anywhere in the United States.
All right, we got 5 minutes left.
All right, let's keep going.
Them would be accurate, and 199 of them would be false positives. I suspect that might be the intended consequence,
Sure,
because I think
why
they want
not?
to inflate the amount of non-citizen registration and voting, which is not zero, and absolutely should be investigated, and tools should be made available to you to help you investigate
Change
it and flag
Eric's
it
bylaws,
and
dipshit.
prosecuted where appropriate.
Right? Like, you're the reason.
You literally have the contract with 27 states where you explicitly say, do not send any citizenship information to us.
And they send non-citizens. And they're like, you guys figure it out. But any non-citizen voting should totally be prosecuted. But also, it's probably a false positive because science.
But also, we don't want to know about it. Hear no evil, see no evil, speak no evil.
But we also know the scope of it is very, very small, and it's not changing outcomes.
Sure.
So perhaps they want to change that. I don't know, but that's the implication of the EO. I don't think that's, again, I don't think that. I mean, look, if DOGE or DHS was directed by the president to go buy all the public voter files and then do whatever hell they wanted it to do with federal databases, I think that's probably legal. It's really bad methodology. But they can't make you all do that. They can't make you be a part of that.
He's horrified.
Basically saying it's really bad methodology to have anyone independent check our work. It's a really bad methodology to bring in anyone we haven't already handled to come in and check our work.
See, but this
and our work is 99.5% bad, but that's just data or something.
But see, going back to this kind of entails everything that we've been talking about in this segment. Going back to, the bureaucracies or not the bureaucracies, the NGOs that cater to the NGOs comprised of government officials that are catered to by these conflicted individuals like David Becker, who have a financial stake in how this goes out. They won't engage in any type of discussion about this with anybody else. Like David Becker would never come on Why We Vote. There's an open invitation for David Becker.
Open invite.
Open invitation to come on. I will donate money to a charity of your choosing if you come on this.
I won't. I'm not paying you shit, but I will definitely ask you questions.
But he won't. Because when he sits there and says that Doge can do all this and it's a horrible and it's probably legal, which means he's getting out in front of this, because I said earlier that this
100%.
This is the part of the EO that is terrifying him the most, and he makes up some bullshit 99.5% database correlation. Get out of here.
Anytime you're comparing two data sets where you have name, first name, last name, and birth date, and ostensibly location, because that's the data sets that we're talking about, it's a 99.5% error rate. No.
Yeah. Well,
no, it's not.
And then the final point I want to make on this is they won't come on here because the first question out of my mouth when he says that this won't work and that this, it might not necessarily be a bad thing, but it's a horrible way to go about doing it. My first question out of my mouth would be, why don't you do it as part of your contract to the states?
No. Okay. Here's the thing. What he said is that an independent audit of the current elections ecosystem is bad methodology, because the current methodology for auditing the election ecosystem is that they audit themselves, and they're the only ones that are experienced and credentialed enough to be able to do it. Remember the whole, well, yeah, that's how technology works, but you're not an elections expert nonsense we went through. They audit themselves by definition and design, and they've gotten away with it up to this point, which is why he's like, I think it's, probably legal if the government decides to check our work, but it's a really bad idea. Why, David? Why is it a bad idea, buddy?
100%.
All right, we're almost there.
The president does not have the power to direct you to do that. Let me go a little farther. I got a question about a section of the EO that gives the federal government unfettered access to local jurisdictions' voting systems, and I think I referred to this. There is this issue in the EO that purports to give the DHS the power and the responsibility of going into every state and locality and review, that's the term, review the security of their voter registration and voting systems. Don't know if they have any capacity to do that. Don't think they have the knowledge base to do that. But that is in the EO.
It's
I don't
Dell
suspect that
computers,
there might be that your
guys.
state's willing to comply. I think that's too bad if
This is already established, and this is going to be, kind of their own demise here. They set this up under the Biden administration, and under when they declared, the election system critical infrastructure. Department of Homeland Security has been going around getting contracts with local jurisdictions to do their cybersecurity for years now. And they're doing it all for free. As long as the federal funds are there, DHS will provide the cybersecurity. Now they're doing it through a third party, Center for Internet Security, CIS, right? But this is already being done. Like, there's no question that they have this type of access, David Becker. If you knew anything about elections, you would know that these agreements are already drawn up. And now that you have somebody like
disinformation,
now that you have somebody like Kristi Noem heading DHS, you might see somebody in charge of CISA that, we already have somebody, this not Space Force guy, but what's his name? He was a cybersecurity in the Air Force, I believe. I don't know, but I would highly recommend Colonel Sean Smith, by the way. I don't know if he would ever do it, but he would be excellent at
Sean Planky.
Sean Planky, that's who it is.
Yeah.
I still haven't gotten any word on what anything about that guy. I don't know. I've done some research on him. He seems like a pretty good guy.
All right. Well, let's finish the last 3 minutes of this.
If that's something you don't want to have happen,
I really want to stop
I hope that the
looking at
state
him.
legislatures and your state election officials will listen to you. But we also know, sadly, there are some leaders in the states who have been all too willing to cede their own authority granted them by the Constitution to a president who is trying to seize it from them. And what I'd ask, if you happen to be, to Republicans who are thinking about doing that now because there's a Republican president, I ask, how would you feel about that if blue states did the same thing when there was a Democrat?
Oh, don't fucking go there.
Democrat and
don't go there.
Lawsuits and
piss all the way
if
off.
the red states didn't just accede.
You all need to. We have to go back to rights now.
Let's play nice now. When we went through and just universally mailed ballots to every single person on the voter roll, and everybody was like, no, this is a terrible idea. And but they didn't listen to us, and they called us conspiracy theorists and election deniers, and arrested us. People like Douglas Mackey, put them in jail. All this shit that we went through, and now all of a sudden you're like,
listen, Brian, how would you feel
if it was a Democrat doing this? And it's like, they've been doing that to us for the last 6 years.
How would you feel if it was a Democrat?
Fatu.
To the Democratic president's we have to be very careful about ceding authority that we have under the Constitution, that the states have, that Congress has, because if you think it's good because you happen to agree with the person who's sitting in the White House, you might find yourself disappointed when that same power is applied by the other party. I know that it's 1:59.
You are right now.
I'm going to stop there. We are going to hold more of these. Get onto our list. Go to our website, electioninnovation.org. I think Walker is going to put on a slide. So there is the
he's going to do the EOLDN in a second.
Get our newsletter. That's where we're going to be. We use those lists to get the word out, but we now have all of your information. We'll let you know if there are other webinars like this. Hopefully you found it useful. Send us feedback. Let me know if you
definitely found it useful, David,
because we want to be of use to you. I'll also note, if you can flip to the other slide real quick. I hope most of you know about the Election Official Legal Defense Network. It's been around since 2021. It is bipartisan, co-chaired by Bob Bauer and Ben Ginsberg. Bob Bauer, former Obama White House counsel, Ben Ginsberg, former George W. Bush counsel. We have a network of over 10,000 attorneys who are ready to assist you pro bono at no cost to you if you have any kind of legal question or need assistance related to your duties as an election official. Doesn't matter what party you belong to, doesn't matter, and I look like I just froze. Hopefully you can still hear me. Walker, can you still hear me? Okay, great. It doesn't matter if, basically we're there for you. Go to EOLDN.org if
free
you ever need
applied.
assistance. There's an intake procedure. It's
I
all
don't
confidential. We don't share it with anybody if you make a request. And then we pair you with a lawyer who's free to you, who you work with. We don't interfere in that relationship. Next, go back to the final slide again, just so the QR code's up in the last minute here.
Unless you're Tina Peters.
Yeah. Well, it's handling. You're being handled. You're being handled by the poor man's Bond villain that we just had to sit through.
I asked Tina on an interview I did with her a while back. And I asked her, have you applied to the EOLDN for legal assistance? And she didn't know what it was at first. And then I told her, and I checked up with her a while later, and she applied, never heard anything back.
Yeah.
So, and that's just what she told me. I didn't verify that she actually applied or anything like that. So I can only say what she told me. But it's a very specific set of election officials that they're looking to defend. It's not, they won't defend, they're
defending the central narrative. They're defending the centralized system. They're not, 100%. That's what's going on. And, I don't know, man. How would you say, based on that 2-part series that we did on David Becker, what would you, on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the most panicked, where would you place him?
12, 47.
Really? I'd put him at like an 8. I think he's still got too much confidence for my liking. And I can't believe he hasn't fled the country yet. Like John.
Oh,
Brennan.
no, I think he's beyond panicked at this point. I mean, the desperation. Yeah. I that's just my personal opinion. Now that being said, that's at the time he did this. I think perhaps the way that the judge ruled last week might change that. Now he's probably closer to like a 7 or an 8. He's still panicked because the things like the Social Security database are going to go through. And that one's the big one, because that one, he could be complicit in that one.
Yeah.
The Social Security database. That one could result in criminal charges for a lot of people, if that's the case, especially considering an inspector general blew the whistle on that with a report saying that there's over, 18 million people that are, inflated on the Social Security database. 18 million people. Like I said earlier, 2 million could sway an election. I think the 2020 election was decided by something like 140,000 votes, right? It from that differ between quote unquote Joe Biden and quote unquote Donald Trump being president, being quote unquote president, I should say. So 18 million people could not just sway an election in that regard, but how many of those 18 million people were voted in 2020 so that it was able to bring that sleepy Joe Biden up to being able to win by 140,000. You know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah.
I think that's his biggest freak out. And I think that's why he came in there with the bogus database crossovers, 99.5% inaccurate. Get the bleep out of here. That's absurd to me that somebody could say our voter registrations, if you do a side-by-side name comparison, would be 99.5% inaccurate. And I know that's not exactly what he said. He used an analogy by saying that another, 200.
That was the stupidest thing I've ever heard.
That was so stupid for him to say that.
Yeah.
That just sounded
science,
so
guys.
desperate.
Science says that you can't actually compare data sets, and they're gonna compare these data sets, and they're gonna come up with a whole bunch of results that show that there's a whole bunch of illegals in the voter rolls in the US, but it's not gonna be real because you can't trust data and it's 95% inaccurate. What?
That sounded desperate and pathetic. And again, I don't think the Social Security, I don't think that's going to show as many illegals. I think he's right on that. I think there are a ton. Well, I think there's a ton of illegals. Don't get me wrong, but I don't think that's what the point in that is. I think, going back to Chris Paul's point, I think there's a lot of fake people in there.
Yeah.
People that just flat out aren't real. And not only have they been voting, but they've been collecting paychecks and they've been collecting Social Security. And this money, where the hell is that money going? Could this be rolled up into the Act Blue, where the money from those accounts then have to be laundered out to other, campaigns and everything else? And, something we didn't talk about with the Act Blue, Act Blue is not just funding campaigns. they're
Let's
funding.
save it because we're talking about
Okay,
ActBlue next
okay.
week.
Okay.
Yeah, next week we have one of the undercover journalists with OMG is going to be joining us. We're very excited about that. Everybody, please smash the thumb for us, the heart button, the pill, wherever you're watching us. Hit the like button, helps us out quite a bit. Check out our sponsors, badlandsmedia.tv/river, and is it badlandsmedia.tv/safe streets?
I think yes, it's Safe
I'll
Streets.
have to double check. Getsafestreets.com/badlands. And then of course, if you missed us and you want to see more of us, grab your GART tickets, badlandsmedia.tv/events, and join the party at GART Plymouth, which is where we are right now while you're watching this. And I think that's all we got.
It's 7:30 on Friday, so we're probably singing karaoke somewhere at this
that.
point. Or we're probably still doing dinner.
Yeah.
So all right, guys, take care. We'll see you guys when we see you next.
Bye, guys.
Thank you so much for joining us, and don't forget to hit the thumbs up on this video. And a special thank you to all of our advertising partners. Please remember to shift your dollars to support those businesses that support Badlands Media.